Welcome to Turning Back the Pages, the podcast where children's book authors discuss their favorite childhood books. I'm your host, Allie. Today, author Rachel Werner is joining me to discuss her favorite childhood book, The Babysitter's Club. Rachel Werner is the author of The Kidlit Floods, Moving and Grieving to Fillmore's Beat, and the Glam World Tour, as well as several new titles in Capstone's Pebble Explore series, such as Ada Lovelace Creates an Algorithm and the forthcoming nonfiction YA title Beauty Emancipation. She's on faculty for Hugo House in Seattle, Lighthouse Writers Workshop in Denver, and the Loft Literary Center in Minneapolis, where she leads curricula to educate writers and content producers in marketing their work. A regular book reviewer for Shelf Awareness, she's contributed print, photography, and video content to We Are Teachers, Highlights Foundation, The Spruce Eats, The Kitchen, and Mother Untitled. Rachel is also humbled and honored to have recently been chosen by the national organization We Need Diverse Books to be a 2025 mentor for aspiring picture book authors. Welcome, Rachel.
Thank you for having me, Allie. Excited to be here.
Well, thank you so much, especially with you or seem like a busy person there.
I would say a lot of the time, yes. But it's December when we're taping this, so things are kind of starting to quiet down for the end of the year and things will get like up rocking and rolling, back in January.
Yes, absolutely. All right. So you have chosen the Babysitters Club to discuss today, which was great timing because my oldest and I had just read the first book in the series. I had never read them before, and I don't know how I've gotten to be 36 and never read them before.
Well, the series was recently rebooted. I don't know if you're reading like the graphic novel versions with your child or if you're going back to the original series.
Oh, the original. I had the copy and then my daughter moved it on me. I had it back here and she found it and she took it back to her room. But yes, no, the original series. Now I did, Netflix has that series. Did you watch the Netflix one?
So I personally haven't seen it, but my daughter actually is in her early teen years now. And so when
Okay.
she was a little bit younger, she did watch it.
Okay. I really it made me want to start reading the book. I was like, okay, yeah, I can picture who these people are. I'm hoping to show that to my daughter pretty soon.
Oh, cool. Hopefully she likes it. Like I said, my daughter definitely, because started reading like the graphic novels. That's actually how I
Hmm.
realized that they had rebooted, the series and they were being, turned into these graphic novels because my daughter went through a phase where she really enjoyed reading graphic novels. And so
Yeah.
she came across them like, oh, this is cool. I was like, well, me and your Aunt Lauren used to read these quite a bit when we were younger. So it's kind of just fun to see something that I like, was like I was so familiar with, like
Yeah.
have this kind of revamp, you know what I mean, relaunch.
Hmm.
It's core to the story, but yet repackaged in a very different way.
Yes, that is really cool. I'm gonna have to look into this because my daughter is into graphic novels. I only found out about them this weekend when I was doing some research on Anne and Martin, and saw that she was active in the revamp of those. All right, so let's do our recap challenge. So we're both going to recap Babysitters Club. We're going to be doing this a little bit differently this time. Rachel will be recapping the series as a whole, and then I'm going to take just the first book, which is Christie's Great Idea. So Rachel, would you like to go first?
Sure, I'm happy to. So, The Babysitter's Club is a very long series. I would be remiss. I had meant to Google before I taped this how many total books there were, but I think I stopped reading them when it got to like the 50s. It's like, I mean, there's a lot of them. But, in the beginning, you kind of have these core group of girls. One of the things I think one of the reasons that really attracted me to the series too was that the fact that, there weren't a lot of books that had this kind of diversity in it when I was younger and growing up. I mean, that's something that's obviously slowly changed about the publishing industry, but I think that's probably one of the things I would definitely want to make sure I highlight about the series is that from day one, you had kids, you had these group of girls that were, their families were different. Like you had people whose parents were divorced and you had people remarried, you had people of different ethnicities and races. And then eventually, you end up having like they had junior sitters that come along once you kind of get to the late teens
Mhm.
part number of the story. Like Jessie comes into play and she is like, she's one of the junior kind of babysitters that it were like basically kids that they originally had babysitted and then they got old enough for them to start becoming babysitters themselves and just showing
Mhm.
kind of evolution. Like I feel like I didn't see a lot of that in series, but going back to Jessie, she was like, she was a black character. And again,
Hmm.
that's not something you would necessarily like see. We had Christy was Asian, and you just like it, you
Hmm.
had you have there was a sitter that comes along that has like a disability. There were just
Hmm.
there was just so many different facets to this that I just, you have, there was one sitter, I don't remember exactly who got sick, got cancer at some
Hmm.
point. There was all these just kind of real life issues. As a kid who just had a pretty unstable childhood, my biological mom ended up passing away when I was 14, and she had
Okay.
a form of lymphoma and was sick most of the time I was alive. And I spent, time in different homes with like different relatives and like friends. And so, like again, I think one of the reasons I really connected with this series and read for so long is that there just weren't a lot of books when I was growing up that just showcase like just a range of like life, not only like people's backgrounds and races and ethnicities, but then also just like kids dealing with real life stuff.
Yeah, that's so interesting because I did not read this series, but even just this first book, it introduces just different types of families from the beginning, which is really cool. And something I wish I would have read as a child.
Right? Because I
Yeah.
feel like, especially when you're like a younger kid, again, I know this is changing, which I definitely, give props to the traditional publishing industry about that in that way. But that idea that, like, you end up having a mom and a dad and, like, a boy and a girl and maybe like a pet. Like, I feel like
Hmm.
there's so many books and TV shows that just showed that and just showing that, like, yeah, these kids are dealing with hard stuff as they kind of grow, through their like adolescence, but yet they're also still living their lives and having fun and having sleepovers, so the whole book wasn't necessarily about like whatever the challenge was, but that was
Right.
still a core part of the narrative.
Right. Yeah, just like in Christy is a great idea. So Christy Thomas, so the characters in the first book, Christy Thomas is the main girl, is from her perspective, and she has a best friend, Marianne, her neighbor friend Claudia, and their new friend Stacy, and they join together and make a babysitting club. The idea occurs to Christy after her single mom has to call multiple babysitters just to find someone to babysit Christy's little brother. And the idea of the club is that the club would meet at specific times each week. So parents would just have to call one number instead of having to reach multiple sitters. There would be one number at specific times during the week, and they would have access to multiple sitters, which I mean sounds like a fantastic. I would love that in 2024. And so, two of the major events of this book, Christy is the only babysitter available to babysit her mother's new boyfriend's kids. So, her mother has been dating Watson, and she's just not a fan of him because I mean, he's getting in the way of, in her mind, of their family. They have a dad, they don't need a Watson. But she does warm up to the kids and eventually to Watson. And then also Stacy, who's the new kid, Stacy and her parents are being very secretive about something. And so Christy ends up confronting Stacy, and Stacy reveals that she has a new diagnosis, and that's diabetes. And but overall, the book really is just about the dynamics of friendship and family while navigating the challenges of their new babysitting business. So
Yeah,
it was really
you
fun.
did a great summary. And I was going to say one thing I wanted to correction. I misspoke before. I had said Christy's character was Asian, but actually that's Claudia. So I just wanted to make sure
Claudia.
it's Claudia. Yes. And so, yeah, I'm like, and then, because that's the kind of the main characters. And obviously, I mean, one of the things also I appreciate is that, you have a character who moves away, at some point in the
Hmm.
series, and then a new person joins the club, right? And then eventually,
Hmm.
but then that person's not gone forever. Like, they kind of come back and visit. And so again, like I mean, it really kind of, I mean, props to really the writer. I mean, oh my gosh, Anne did a great job of just covering just a vast, array of just life experiences that kids go through.
Yeah, she really did. She was a teacher for a little while. Actually, okay, here I have a about Anne Martin in there. I have a few quiz questions to see if you know what you know about
How
Anne,
much I
but
can remember.
she was really interesting. Okay, so Anne M. Martin was born in 1955. She grew up in Princeton, New Jersey. which I was there this summer.
Oh,
That
okay.
was fun. Her mother was a preschool teacher and her father was a cartoonist for the New Yorker. From a young age, she enjoyed writing. Even before she would write, she would dictate stories to her mother to write down. Some of her favorite books were Adventures in Wonderland, Mary Poppins, Dr. Dolittle, Pippi Longstockings, and the Roald Dahl books. She attended Smith College and studied early childhood education and child psychology, and her senior thesis was on children's literature in the classroom. After graduation, she taught fourth and fifth grade children diagnosed with autism and students who struggled with dyslexia. This time in the classroom eventually influenced her writing. After teaching, she decided to pursue publishing and writing. Do you know what her first book published was?
No, oh my gosh, I have no idea. I'm gonna assume it's
I had
not the
never heard of it.
Babysitters. I was I'm gonna assume it's not the Babysitters Club.
It is not. It is called Bummer Summer, and I cannot tell you a thing about it other
Okay.
than it won the Children's Choice Award in 1985.
Okay, that's cool.
So then she began to write the beloved series, The Babysitter's Club. And you were
I was
right.
just thinking that's how she got that next book deal.
There were 131 babysitter clubs in the original.
I knew it was, like I said, I know I stopped reading somewhere in the 50s. You know what I mean? At that point, I think
Hmm.
I had out and started reading like other books, like my interest had expanded. And obviously my reading level was higher. So I'd moved on to other things, but I knew because I had them, like I saved them. Me and my sister would save like all the copies we had. And I had dozens of them.
So she did not write all 131. She wrote, do you want to guess how many she actually wrote?
I'm gonna say she stopped writing probably. I'm gonna be hopeful and say like maybe somewhere between 60 and 70. I was like probably a little bit after I stopped reading them.
Actually, 35.
Really? Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. So I didn't even notice. So whoever picked it up was doing such a good job. I didn't even realize the author had changed.
Yes. Now, I think she was involved in like the junior series and those, but the original Babysitters Club, she wrote 35 and the rest were ghostwriters hired by Scholastic.
Oh, okay.
So since then, she's focused on writing single novels, one of which won a Newbery Honor Award in 2003. That was A Corner of the Universe, which I also have never heard of. Other fun facts about the Babysitters Club. The character of Christy is based on her childhood best friend, Beth, and Mary Ann is loosely based on herself.
Okay.
The first book of the series, the one that I read, was her favorite to write. She finished writing her 35 books of the Babysitters Club, and then she wrote a prequel called The Summer Before. Did you read that one?
No,
Uh,
now I feel like I almost have to.
it features the girls right before they formed their club.
Okay.
So the hardest book for her to write was Claudia and the Sad Goodbye because it was the book where Claudia's grandmother dies. And she wrote this book shortly after her own grandmother died. So Anne is still living. She
That
lives a
I
very
knew. I
private,
knew she was still alive. Yep.
she lives a very private life, but she is helping with the books that you mentioned, the graphic novels of the Babysitters Club. So tell me why choose the Babysitters Club?
Like I said, there weren't a lot. When you first reached out to me about being on the podcast, I had to think a while because I wanted to be sincere about the
Hmm.
book that I picked, but I honestly was drawing a blank for a bit. I was trying to think of like, well, what's a picture book? 'Cause that's usually just with me writing
Hmm.
picture books, that tends to be one of the first things I think about. And I'm like, I can think of lots of picture books that I love as an adult or ones that my
Right.
daughter really liked, but I was really kind of racking my brain that I could be like, okay, that I really felt like I connected with or identified with. And I was like, you know what? And then I thought, that's why I was like, can I talk about a series? Because again, I just feel like it's something that's just continues to, we just need more of still today, is that representation. And I think it was, it's
Hmm.
something that I couldn't have spoken to as a child because I didn't have the language for it, but now looking back as an adult, and definitely one of the reasons why I like writing for younger readers or like writing for younger readers so much is just to continue just to kind of make it more possible, the fact that like so more kids can see themselves in books. I mean, there
Mhm.
are obviously themes and topics that you can write about, that are kind of universal, right? Like,
Mhm.
using the example of like a relative passing away, someone getting sick. And there are definitely, and those are certain things that kids of all backgrounds obviously can, if they've lived that, if that's something they're currently dealing with, I think it's super important, obviously, to write about those topics, but legitimately being like, oh yeah, like this character looks like me, the way to
Mhm.
describe me, right?
Mhm.
Or like that family structure, right? I mean, like literally, I cannot think of a single other book that I read when I was a kid where there was a single parent, right?
Right.
Like you said, I mean, and that's huge. I mean, she literally started the book, you know what I mean? It wasn't
Mhm.
something that she thought of later. Like Anne had the foresight to be like, yeah, I'm going to make one of the main characters in the very first book have like, as a single child. And it's not like, and it wasn't like, I mean, obviously, like, like with anything, like I myself, I'm divorced, I'm a single parent. So, and I have sole custody in place of my child. So I understand, like, not that there aren't like struggles and challenges, but it wasn't like, I feel like a lot of times there's like these extremes, right? You think of like single parent households, and a lot of times, especially when I was younger, I would assume when you were younger too, a lot of that's portrayed as like these people are really struggling financially, and not saying there aren't families that are like that, but there are people, myself included, where it's like, well, actually, like you're living like a middle class background. Some people are even like wealthy. And so I think it's just creating more opportunities for kids to really see themselves reflected. Like we say all the time that like there's no normal, right? That like everyone's, a family is a family. But when kids don't really see that in
Right.
books, right? Like
Mhm.
how does, or on movies or TV shows, like I said, thank God, just like that's changing in all types of different art
Mhm.
form, or at least in mainstream. Because I don't want to
Mhm.
make it sound like examples of art like that didn't exist before, because it did, but it wasn't mainstream. And so
Right.
I think that's really, really important. And so I just was like, yeah, I want to give props to this woman who, like, again, I didn't know a ton about Anne Martin, but I knew she wasn't a person of color. Like I knew, you know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like, and so
Mhm.
all these ways, but yet she still had the foresight and the courage, and just to like, you know what I mean? To really just like,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm gonna make a series for everyone.
Right. Yeah, it really is, especially in the years that she's writing, like
Yeah.
1985, like that very much is not
Nope.
represented then. What did that feel like to, I mean, you say you recognize it now. When you were younger, what did it feel like to see your experience on
I
the
think
page?
I think that's one of the reasons again, like I said, I don't think I could have put that into words, but I think that's probably one of the reasons I loved the series so much. I mean, yes, I was, a girl, and it's cool to like read. I was always reading like at least probably like a grade or two above like my reading
Hmm.
level. So I think there was something about like, having like a chapter book that was interesting to me, maybe before maybe my classmates, we were, necessarily reading at that level. So here's something where it interests me, and that it wasn't done, right? That like
Hmm.
it went on. And I think also it had that, back in like when Anne was writing, even though obviously I didn't start seeing these books until I was like, in the 90s, but like, there was that soap opera feel. Like, I don't know about you, but every woman in my life watched some soap opera when I was growing up. So then
Yes.
by default, I and my sister, we spent years. I mean, I think I stopped watching General Hospital when I was like in my early 20s, right? Like I probably put a good decade of my life also. So I think it was kind of like a way for me, so that idea of like, oh yeah, this is like, so each book is kind of like an episode, right? Like
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
story goes on, and like the saga, I mean, on a very like age appropriate level, it was
Hmm.
just kind of like, it was like that kind of evolution where and so I think that was a big part of it. That was the hook, right? It's like, oh, I know how this works.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. That's really cool. Have you read them since, like when your daughter was old enough to read them?
Only the graphic novels. We never went
Okay.
back. So with my daughter, what I did when she was younger, like I said, now she's like in her early teens. So like, she is reading, well, now she's getting into like, rom-com, I have to like make sure it's like age appropriate, right? It's like, all right, like is there kissing, but like let's not get any, sex in this
Hmm.
book. You know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
in that line. But what I would do is I would read a classic book, for instance, like Little Women was another book that I loved when I was younger. So like I read her when she was younger, Little Women. And then we actually read all of them. We read Little Men, and then there's a
Uh-huh.
third book in that. And so like I read her that whole thing. I actually read her Black Beauty, which was a really sad book. I actually never read that book when I was a kid. But so she picked that, and I was like, ooh.
I read like Black Beauty, Secret Garden, and Little Princess all in third grade. And I just remember being like, are all books depressing? Like, they're so sad.
Yeah, I read her The Secret Garden too. That's another book. Yeah, that's also a sad tale.
Yes, I can have specific memories of where I was reading all three of those. It was within the same year, and it was just like, oh, I need something a little bit more cheerful than this. What is your favorite part, whether it's in this book or in the whole series? What's your favorite book, or who's your favorite character?
Ooh, I think I like the fact I really liked that Jesse, and there's another character, the name escapes my head, but there's two characters that they were babysat by them, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
as they get old enough that they become sitters. And so then they kind of so they slowly become more a part of the series as it goes on. And I really appreciate like that's kind of cool. You know what I mean? I kind of
Mm-hmm.
characters. Like I said, it's that whole kind of soap opera mentality, right? They get introduced as like kids, and then you kind of watch them like
Mm-hmm.
grow up and they become more a part of like the story. So I definitely dug. I'm like, oh, let me think of it. Let me see if I can find it. But I think it was it's Jesse Ramsey, and then it might have been Mallory, I think is the other one that was young.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think it's Mallory and Jesse that they were charges essentially. They were getting paid
Mm-hmm.
to watch them, the originals, and then eventually they get old enough to become a part of the actual babysitter club. And then you have that whole thing too where you watch them have to struggle to now suddenly learn how to watch other children. Like there's a couple
Mm-hmm.
books about them having to like, sit kids for the first time.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's such an interesting part of the book of learning. And my oldest daughter was quizzing me about when I was a babysitter recently. She was quizzing me what it was like being a babysitter versus being a mom, and I was just like, yeah, I mean, I was 11 when I first started babysitting, and I nearly set their house on fire. So I personally, I put a wrapped Pop-Tart into the microwave.
Oh
Yeah.
no.
Thankfully, I was right there and
Oh
I
gosh.
pulled it
You're like,
open.
why is it like
Why
sparking?
is it doing this? Why is it doing this? And I was like, so personally, I would not let an 11-year-old babysit my children. But it was like there's a lot of responsibility. I was just starting to reflect like there's a lot of responsibility when you start taking care of other people's children, like if you choose to do that as a babysitter. And so that's an interesting way to introduce like the challenges of to for young girls to go through of just they're business owners, but also they are learning these big responsibilities of taking other care of other people's children. And Christy is like naturally talented at,
Yeah.
especially with the hyper children, the children that have got a lot of energy or maybe sometimes are considered the bad children or whatever. She's actually very talented at doing that. But then turning that into like a business, I think I saw how that probably could be turned into like a theme throughout the books that I don't know, just stewarding your talent well.
Well, I also think too, it's like that idea, right? That like you said, you might have somebody like Chrissy, you're like, well, this is just a part of your natural skill
Hmm.
set. But what does it look like to like learn, right? Because
Yes.
and the fact that you're also still a kid yourself, like you said, like you're
Hmm.
gonna make mistakes. Like at that moment, you're like, oh, I guess I don't make Pop-Tarts like this, right? Like
Yep.
and those things. And I feel like, yeah, I like I said, it's just, I mean, it doesn't surprise me that now that then learn that Anne had the kind of that extensive education background and all
Yes.
the interactions she's had probably with kids over the years. Because I feel like I said, when I was reading them, there's just, even though I wasn't babysitting yet and I wouldn't be for years, you know what I mean? Still, I think there's just so many things you're reading and it was so relatable. It was so relatable. Like just
Hmm.
the characters, the different scenarios they got themselves into, you know what I mean? In just so many different ways.
Were you an avid reader as a child?
Oh gosh, yes. Yes, I actually, it was one of those things where I loved reading for so long. I mean, I was reading well into high school and through high school. I mean, I went through a phase, and not that I can ever say that I stopped reading, but something about going to college definitely disrupted. I just know there was a phase in my life where, not that I wasn't reading at all, but it definitely wasn't like just like a default hobby. And finally, at some point, I think I was like in my early 20s, I was just like, oh my gosh, and I was like traveling and moving a lot and stuff around Europe. And then I can't remember if someone gave me a book or maybe I picked one up in a hostel I was sitting in. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I used to love reading so much. Just in that sense that reminding myself that like like I just wasn't really, you know what I mean? Like maybe I would read a book
Hmm.
or two here. I don't even know, you know what I mean? But just realizing how much versus going from somebody who like was always reading something that it really kind of was a period of time where that part kind of transitioned, like they just
Hmm.
like, kind of faded out of the way, probably for partying and other things. But and then you know what I mean, and that was kind of the and it's just and then it stayed ever since, right? Like it was just once I kind of had that book in my head and had time and space for it, and then it was just a matter of, you know, what I've done, what I read has definitely evolved over the years greatly. But no, yeah, I mean, if anything, I'm at a point now with life where I could never do this when I was younger, but I used to always have to like read one book. I could never understand how people were reading more than one book at once. That is so me. I don't even know how many books started in my house. And like I should never buy another book, but I continue to buy them. Like I have so many books. My child has so many books, and we've given them away. It's just like I realize that yeah, I'm just gonna keep I will yeah, and it's just I think the thing is I keep discovering more and more things that I
Yes.
want to read. Like finance books was the most recent thing. Like the last couple of years I've started reading finance books, you know.
Yeah.
It just keeps evolving. You know, and now with what I do, you know, with writing myself and teaching writing classes and different types of writing classes throughout the year and different entities, sometimes I mean, obviously I'm reading a lot of the times too for other mentor texts I can
Yes.
suggest to my students and people that I'm working with. But yeah, I mean, like I said,
Yes.
outside from my own enjoyment or education, depending on whatever I'm, you know, working on currently in life. And so yeah, it's pretty, I love books. I literally books and paper. Like so paper and clothes. I tell like I have a paper thing. I literally had to stop. I can no longer subscribe to magazines because I go through these phases where I don't have time to read them, but I keep thinking I'm going to. So I would just have stacks of magazines sitting around. It's like, well, you know what I mean? Because eventually I'm gonna go back and I'm
Yes.
gonna finish that
Oh
mag.
yeah.
So like no more magazine subscriptions because paper and like and clothes are like my two weaknesses. I'm a minimalist when it comes to everything else. Like if you need a pan in my house, you have like four options, right? And I'm somebody who cooks a lot, but it's like, no, we can just wash that pan. I don't need to buy anymore, but you know what I mean? But like,
Right.
but look at like probably, I don't know, who knows, probably hundreds of books in my house, you know?
Yes, absolutely. Both of my children have like books all over. My oldest, her bookshelf is like it's books are popping out. She's got books in her side table. The one is just full of chapter books there, and then she's got library books just all around her bed. And
Yes.
I was like, okay, we're gonna do better with the second child. And no, it's just bad. It's just as bad. And her bookshelf is overflowing. Her nightstand is overflowing. There are books everywhere. I'm like, why are they so bad about I literally have 3 boxes of books on this side. I have 3 tubs of books on this side. I have a stack of books that comes up to my shoulder in our living room. So, I don't know where
Yeah.
they get it from.
Oh yeah. Well, and the thing is too, like exactly, like I like literally like so I just bought a house like in at the end of last summer and we moved and then we went to go get like library cards, you know, within the first couple weeks of like in our new like area where we live. And I was like, and really, just like before we moved, I mean, we are huge like library people. A bookstore or a library, that's one of the few things my child and I both equally enjoy. We
Hmm.
can kill hours easily if we
Hmm.
let ourselves. And it's like, we should actually probably not have library cards. If you knew the amount of money I've spent in library fees in the last probably like decade or so, like of life, because like, you know what I mean? Because it's like, yeah, that book is who knows in this house with how many books that we
Hmm.
have. And why are we going to the library to get more books when we have books in the house we still haven't read yet ourselves? It's like
Yes.
so bad.
Yes. That's literally after I get off with you. We are going to the library to return
Yep.
all the books that
All
are
the books
due
so we can
before
get more
Christmas.
books.
So let's talk
Okay.
about you. So tell me about your books and your latest book and what you're working on.
Oh gosh, I feel like I was just having to answer this question at you. So I teach yoga because, you know, of course, I need one more thing to do. So just to answer this question at the yoga studio earlier today. So I've signed like 7 book deals in the last 3, now almost 4 years. My first book was actually what's called an IP project. And what that means is like it's still traditional publishing, but what happens is that I'm just explaining this to your readers, you probably or your listeners, I should say, since you probably already know this, is that a publisher already has a concept. So in this case, Capstone already had a concept for a book, not only a book, but like a whole series, and it was called Wild Earth. And so every book in that series was written by a different author, or some of them might have been written, two of them might have been written, but essentially there's like 6 or 7 books in the series. I wrote the one on floods. So it was each book was about another extreme weather phenomenon. So that was technically my first like kids book that got published, is that so because I wrote the floods one in Capstone's Wild Earth series. And then I went, and then Capstone, once I kind of was connected with them in that way, even though it was a totally different branch of like the publishing house, I was like, hey, I have this picture book manuscript. The editor I was working with on floods, like, I know this isn't in your wheelhouse, but would you be willing to connect me or share this with somebody who's kind of in that side of publishing, right? Acquisitions, because that's called acquiring, when you at that point I hadn't signed with my agent, but now I'm represented by KT Lit. And so, the editor I was working at the time said, sure, she took it, she sent it over to, via email to the acquisition side of things. And so that was the Fillmore book that just came out last fall. Because one of the things that I don't know if your listeners are familiar with is that, especially when it comes to kid lit, if there's art involved, like a lot of art with picture books, there's usually quite a bit of lag time from the time that book gets written and designed and all the things and the artwork produced. So even though that Fillmore book was written probably in 2020 or 2021, it just came out last fall in August 2023.
Publishing takes a long time.
It can take a long time. So that book came out, and so that was my first picture book. And then in the meantime, I had signed another IP deal with a different publisher. So I actually have a cookbook out as well. And that's because, like I said, I've worked in the fitness industry a little bit longer than I've been doing writing, like as a freelancer, like professionally. So it's been a little bit over 10 years. So I have I'm a yoga instructor. I'm a certified holistic nutritionist and a bunch of other kind of wellness, mindfulness, and a bunch of patients. And so I wrote a book about macro cooking and macro nutrition. So that was Macro Cooking Made Simple. That came out last year too. That was in of last year. And then I also then signed another IP deal with Capstone. So those 3 books just came out this August. And so that's a part of like this kind of history STEM series that they have. One is about Ada Lovelace's and creating the math algorithm, which, by the way, probably was one of the hardest things I've ever written, because that's a very complex topic to try to distill down to the literacy level of a second grader. So that's a fun challenge. But then there's one about the Wright brothers' first flight and the invention of the telephone. So those 3 books just came out this August. My next picture book, the Glam World Tour, that was my manuscript, and that's published by Capstone as well. That actually comes out in January. So I'm super excited about Glam World Tour. It's already available for pre-order, like in Barnes and Noble and Target and local independent bookstores, if you can support those, which is always amazing, or like Bookshop online that supports stores. And then my first manuscript, our book, I should say, was sold on proposal, that will be coming out with one of the big 5 with Macmillan. They bought that. And again, I'm still writing the final draft of that book since it was sold on proposal, but that'll be a nonfiction YA book. And that's the Beauty Emancipation, which you mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, which will come out right now sometime in 2026.
That is exciting. So tell me about that one. So tell me
Beauty Emancipation or the Glam World Tour. Beauty Emancipation won't be out for another year.
Glam World Tour, the one that comes out in January.
Yeah, so Glam World Tour is basically just a celebration of all beauty, habits, practices, rituals from around the world, but again, it's a picture book. So it's just this amazing, beautiful artwork. Shout out to Octavia Inc. She is the illustrator. Oh my gosh. I literally still have to change the background on my computer to one of the spreads. It's so colorful. It's so vibrant. She did such a great job of just, you can literally see, you're watching kids get their hair done, right? Getting cornrows with their hair in this book. We define things. So if you have a child who maybe doesn't know what locks are or henna, we define, there's definitions in the books, but the spreads are just so beautiful and colorful. You get to see, people again, it's like that you're seeing the range of just, of what people look like, skin shades and like physical like capabilities. Yeah, it's just a really cool book. I was not familiar with Octavia's artwork before when Capstone found her to be the illustrator, and they had me kind of look at some of her initial sketches, and I was like, okay, but the way she just managed to bring the vision for life, like I literally cannot imagine another illustrator having done the photo, like the pictures for this book. I don't want to call them photos because they're not. They're just these awesome, just her inking, the way where she decides to do a heavy line and a thin line, and the way it just complements my writing. It literally just flows. The words just flow from page to page. It's just a really beautiful book.
Yeah, I just had a short mini series that I interviewed artists of picture books.
Yeah.
And I mean, I just bumbled my way through it because I don't know anything about art, but I am endlessly fascinated by the way that illustrators can make someone else's vision come alive in a way that really makes the book. So that sounds like they found the right person for
Oh
your
yeah.
book.
100%. Like I said, yeah, I mean, I just if I could somehow finagle it so that any picture book deals that I'm happy, I'm hopefully lucky enough to sign moving forward, that Octavia could be the illustrator for it, I would want to lock that down if I could. But but I obviously don't have that kind of control over it. But yeah, I think it's just, if you're looking for books where it's like, it really just kind of celebrates the whole idea if it's meant to be like a pop-up market, right?
Hmm.
So the idea is that here's this pop-up market that's filled with just beauty trinkets and services, and that it just moves around the globe, right? And so,
Hmm.
I mean, even like we even have a spread that says that, like Tehran, London, and she sketched little mini, like kind of each city
Oh,
like an island. I mean, like I'm not kidding you. It looks so cool.
that's really exciting. I can't wait to see it. That's really cool. What do you hope readers take away from your book?
That we're just, we hear this a lot, and it maybe in some ways sounds so cliche that like we're all beautiful in our own way. But I think it's the idea that like beauty is, I hope it makes it tangible that beauty is subjective, and what it means to be beautiful and how we feel like we make ourselves beautiful. Not that you really need to do anything to make yourself beautiful, but to celebrate your inherent
Hmm.
beauty looks very different depending on, again,
Hmm.
what your background is, your tradition is, your family, your culture, all those things. And one's not better or worse than another. It's just different. You know what I mean? And they're all
Right,
fun. Right. Like, I
right.
mean, if you, whoever you are, if you like to play dress up, do your hair done, what I mean? Like hair, all the things, like we can all do it. Like, you know what I mean? Do it and shine.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds like a great book. Well, tell people where they can follow you, or anything that you have, websites, newsletters, etc.
Yeah, so I have a newsletter that I send out once a month called The Rich Writer's Life. If you Google that, it's on Beehive. So you can sign up for that. I get it like once a month. I keep it short and sweet. Again, I update you on what's coming down, anything else I've written besides just books, because I still write for magazines and newspapers and like digital media sites too. Capstone, so they've published a lot of my books. You can always go to their website and kind of check it out there on pretty much all social media accounts. So Instagram, LinkedIn, Threads, TikTok. I'm at The Real Script. So The Real Script, just written as one word. Twitter/X, it's the same thing. Just put an S on the end because it used to be tweets. So it says at The Real Scripts, right? So it's plural. Facebook, I don't use that a ton, I'll be honest, like professionally. I just kind of let it run itself. So that's the only reason I'm not naming that. But like I said, but if you can find me and you're connected to someone I know and you can actually friend me, I'm always happy. I'm so not a secret person. I'm very active on social media.
Okay, well, thank you so much for being here, Rachel. Y'all follow Rachel on all the socials. You can find all of her information in the show notes. Thank you for listening to this episode of Turning Back the Pages. If you have any author suggestions, you can follow me on Instagram at WhatAllieWrites or email me at whatallywrites@gmail.com. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen.